Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Samira Tilley, Marketing Manager at Assemble Systems. Our webinar today will cover how Agnes uses Assemble to expand the use of BIM to project stakeholders. Now let's get started. It is my pleasure to introduce you to Tim Kelly, Senior Product Manager at Assemble. Go ahead, Tim.
Thank you, Samira. So today I'm going to go ahead and dive in really quick to our agenda, and then I'm going to be turning it over for our main content with Matt's presentation. So first off, we'll do some speaker introductions. We'll give Matt a chance to introduce himself, as well as our special guest today, Don Henrik. And then we're going to go through some company introductions, and then we'll dive into the key content, which is a number of different use cases Agnes is running through. And I'm particularly excited about this because we see companies like Agnes expanding their use of BIM in general and the use of Assemble across a number of different workflows. After that, we'll give some time for questions that you guys have. So with that said, I'll go ahead and introduce myself very briefly. As Samir mentioned, I'm the Senior Product Manager at Assemble. My background is in construction management. I spent a number of years in both pre-construction and in the field, and then transitioned over to providing software for the construction industry. That's basically it. I'll go ahead and turn it over to Matt DeBasio, our key speaker today.
Thanks so much for having me, Tim. Good afternoon, everyone out there, and I guess good morning still to anyone joining us from the West Coast. My name is Matt DeBasio. I am a project estimator for Agnes. I've been with Agnes for over 13 years. Agnes is a construction manager here in Philadelphia, PA, and we work primarily in the Philly metro region, New Jersey, and some other surrounding areas. I graduated from Penn State University, home of the original BIM execution plan from the College of Arts and Architecture, and I've been with Agnes ever since.
So as I mentioned, today we do have a special guest speaker, and that's Don Henrik, President of Assemble Systems. Don, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself as well, and then I'll let you dive in from there to introducing Assemble.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Don Henrik here. As Tim said, I'm the president of the company, and for the last 15 years or so, I have been working on 3D, 4D, and 5D technology for the construction world. That's been through a series of companies and products that you may be familiar with, but my focus is on Assemble Systems, and we're going to talk a little bit today about the recent acquisition of the company. So welcome, and I hope you have an excellent learning session today. We describe Assemble as a system of engagement, and we compare that to a system of record. So many of you use systems of record that are behind your firewall. The system of engagement is something that allows you to operate really over the web, and it also connects systems. So if you see the definition we have here in the center of this slide, we're really creating a project collaboration space that combines and unlocks the data in models, drawings, and point clouds, and then allows you to condition and organize the data. When we talk about condition, I think the key for construction users is we make the data ready for use. So I might need it in one particular report form for one subcontractor. I might need it in a different form and format with different coding for an ERP system. I might need only a subset of it for scheduling purposes. And that's really kind of, I would say, Assemble's superpower is to condition that data and make it available to people and to other systems. So along the bottom you see condition, organize, and connect. And that is really what I think Matt will help you see today, how he uses it throughout the construction process at his firm. I also wanted to talk just briefly about the acquisition of Assemble by Autodesk and help people to understand it a little better. We are at Assemble very excited to join Autodesk as part of the construction solutions team. And there are kind of 4 items that we frequently get asked about. And so I'd like to just kind of cover those. The first one is, of course, why did they do that? And we know that building information models are becoming more and more normal in the process of design and construction. And so we want to increase the value of the building information models by connecting this information, as I said earlier, conditioning it and connecting it. So that was really the big play here, was a very easy to use application that's widely used in North America, that is easily connected to many other parts of the construction process. The next question people often ask is, well, how does this affect the customers of Assemble? And I would say really it won't. I think the kind of little more detailed is that you'll continue to work with the team that you're familiar with for trials, licensing, customer success, and support. Over time, we'll tightly integrate the Assemble product with the BIM 360 family, and we want to do that to benefit the BIM 360 customers as well as others who could benefit from BIM 360. So very exciting times and lots of great opportunity. Also, people ask, how does it affect us, the employees? I'm proud to say that 100% of the Assemble employees have joined Autodesk, and we're all thrilled to be part of the AEC market leader. And we're going to focus, our efforts on driving Autodesk products and services deeper into construction. Of course, our initial focus is the Assemble product, but we'll broaden that out over time. And then last but not least, how does this affect our partners? So this week we met with our good partner Sage, who is the owner of Sage Estimating. We have partnerships with many other companies, and I've spoken with all those partners personally and assured them we're going to work closely with them, not only to continue to support the integrations, but to improve them, because what we're really focused on is having successful customers. We know that will be the best in the end for us as a company if we can continue to change the industry by making our customers more successful. Without any further ado, I will turn it over to Matt.
Thanks, Don. I appreciate that. And before Matt dives in, I do want to echo that, I think across the board, as Don mentioned, we're very excited to be joining Autodesk and continuing to drive deeper into pushing solutions for construction. Really appreciate you covering that, Don. All right, Matt, why don't you go ahead and do your overview of Agnes and let everyone know where you guys are coming from.
Well, thanks very much, Don and Tim. Agnes is a family-owned company. We're currently with the 4th generation active within management and operations. Being family-owned probably isn't that unusual for construction companies, but the team culture that we fostered here and everyone really being a part of that family is something that we're really proud of. We're also very proud to be celebrating our 100-year anniversary this year in 2018, which is maybe a bit more unusual to have that duration of sustained success and growth. But nonetheless, we are celebrating our history and track record of success, and at the same time trying to focus on the future. We hope to remain strong for another 100 years. Agnes's annual volume ranges from probably about 125 million to 150 million annually. In our market, we're considered upper to mid-sized firms, certainly not the largest company, as we do have some of the national players in our market, but we're not super small either. We work with mainly institutional clients. Our 2 primary market sectors are healthcare and higher education, and within those sectors we work on a variety of project types. For healthcare, we do anything from new patient care and treatment facilities, urgent care, imaging suites, and medical research labs to administrative spaces or medical office buildings. On the higher education side, it's pretty wide-ranging. We can do new classroom spaces, laboratories, multimedia spaces, and even new student housing or residence halls. I'll be using a couple of our current healthcare projects with one of our best clients, Jefferson Health, as examples for our use case discussion. Implementation of new technology here usually starts with a pretty selective and targeted approach. We like to focus on specific projects and team members that are obvious as far as value adds for those technologies. We began much the same way with implementation of BIM, as I'm sure a lot of other firms have as well. But pretty soon we started thinking about how to expand the use of BIM tools and processes to more teams or departments here, estimating, project management, field ops, and also looking for opportunities on more different types of projects. And then from there, we looked at how to include the expanded project family, if you will, in those processes, our trade partners, subcontractors, architects, engineers, and even the owners. And how to do that, no matter what their level of understanding or experience with some of those newer tools out there, was kind of an objective or a challenge of ours as well. So our approach has always been that it should be easy for those other stakeholders to participate closely with us in the project processes. And if we are proposing to introduce a new tool or technology to the team on a real project, there should be at least some value for everyone involved. And we found that Assemble was a good solution to help us meet those objectives. Well, I'm an estimator and I've worked my entire tenure here in pre-construction. It's been pretty well established already, and there's a lot of content out there already on how Assemble is a very valuable tool in estimating and pre-con. That's certainly true, and I'll give you some examples on specific challenges we've addressed in pre-con, but also how us using Assemble in that capacity in pre-construction can generate some pretty valuable info for all those other stakeholders. It's important to note, I think, that what we found is a lot of work that we do in Assemble during pre-con can prove really valuable downstream. So we've tried to approach the work in estimating with that downstream value in mind for sort of the wider project lifecycle. Wherever possible, we want to think about where we can save time and leverage any work that's already being done up front in estimating. Everyone in estimating should obviously be establishing best practices, especially when you're trying to incorporate a new tool like Assemble into your process. But we've also tried to think about how those best practices can serve to condition the model data in certain ways so the other project stakeholders can realize more value from the data.
Fantastic. So I'm going to go ahead and just ask you, if you can, really briefly, before your pre-construction group was using Assemble, can you talk a little bit, just kind of list off some of the other technology you guys were using to manage model data or BIM in general?
So prior to the introduction of Assemble, it was mainly kind of a two-platform situation. Autodesk being the main one. You know, we received most of our design files through the authoring tools, Revit or AutoCAD. Our MEP coordination team would primarily be digesting those authored files or other file types from subcontractors through Navisworks. And we would be hosting and sharing that information on some sort of other cloud platform, whether it be Box.com or we now use Procore for operations.
Perfect. I appreciate that. Just kind of get a lay of the land.
Sure. And I'll try to reference some of those things and how we came to where we are currently in some of these examples.
Perfect.
So the project stakeholders, we've selected a few key trades as examples of the challenges that might be presented and how the process of working through those challenges can end up generating valuable info for the other stakeholders. For the purpose of this discussion, I'm going to use a project that's at the design development level of documentation, not yet at full ready-to-be-built construction documents level, but more or less the point at which we would be working on preparing maybe our second or third iteration of the project budget, and also sort of midstream in the evolution of the building design and the model data. We'll also look at a few other areas in the project life cycle beyond just pre-con, project management, MEP coordination, field operations, and even a little bit of benefit, I think, to our clients and how Assemble can help us generate useful info for all those team members.
All right, so let's go ahead and dive into your use case around Assemble for structural steel.
Sure. So this is a new hospital building in New Jersey. Its structural makeup is concrete for the lower two levels, sort of a platform or a pedestal of concrete with steel framing above that. In working through the steel in estimating, we wanted to focus on first what was actually present in the model data-wise and how we could leverage it, but also we wanted to make sure we knew how to identify what's not there that we would still need for estimating. So by using Assemble's filtering and show hide features under the visibility settings, you can very quickly isolate the steel framing and generate tonnage of steel for the framing that is shown in the model. This was a real good, easy case study for time savings on Assemble, something that would have normally taken us probably 6 or 8 hours to trace over the different wide flange steel members on 2D drawings and calculate the weights out. We accomplished in probably a few minutes using Assemble. So right off the bat, we have a really good example of how Assemble saved us time in pre-con. But what it also did was it gave us a way to identify what might not be present in the model. So sort of a little quality control, but also allowing us to focus on the finer points. So we were very quickly identified all the structural steel except for spandrel detail, which occurs as typical around the upper perimeter of this building. Using the 2D viewer in Assemble, we were actually able to sort through the structural drawings to look at the typical details right alongside the 3D model. And in the 2D viewer, you can use the marquee select function over a particular detail. And in doing so, we can check to see if we're also selecting items that had been modeled as objects in the 3D view. When no objects are highlighted, we then know that that detail was not included in the initial framing takeoff and the weight calculation that we produced so quickly. So a lot of folks out there might be saying, well, that's great if, you know, Assemble can do all that so quickly, but you're missing stuff. Well, the results, you know, you're missing many tons of steel from that initial calculation. The speed in which we generated that takeoff was still hugely beneficial in that it allows us to spend more time focusing on that detail. And if we wanted to use that as a discussion point with the design team, we could. We could use it to generate RFIs in order to clarify the locations or the extent around the upper penthouse level where the detail occurs. We could use it with sub-bidders to ensure their budget is accounting for that additional steel and maybe even comparing what they had come up with, what we had come up with. And also identifying this is really valuable for the project management team. Doing so early, you know, we really need to fully understand the steel details at this level in order to begin to produce an accurate schedule. And also, since this detail would affect constructability review, you know, the PM team couldn't possibly get the flashing detail right unless we really understood this well. So I think this is right off the bat, a really good example of benefit to, you know, a number of different parties.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you really hit on the important part here, which is you can pull the information together very quickly, but doing that 2D to 3D comparison of looking at the model and the quantities coming out of that, comparing that to where your details are, what the drawings look like in general, what shows up on the drawings that's coming out of the model, all of that validation to make sure your numbers working in the right direction is key. And I think you also touched a bit on kind of that initial launching point. You jump from there into less clicking and more analysis of the project, and I think that's absolutely key. That gets you going.
Yeah, you're right about that, Tim. And the 2D viewer, that feature that was introduced into Assemble was, I think, pretty key for us in making that leap between the traditional 2D takeoff processes and starting to incorporate 3D. It's a little bit less of a learning curve. It's a little bit more comfortable, for sure.
Absolutely.
So another trade I chose to use as an example here was glazing. In this hospital, they've included multiple types of glazing systems, mainly curtain wall storefront systems, which we can begin grouping as such one or the other by assigning Assemble properties. I happen to use bid package and then maybe 1 or 2 sub-levels for grouping each bid package into sub-levels, and you could add custom properties to help you in that regard. But there were different sizes for the system framing. There were 7-inch and 10-inch framing, but the DD drawings did not identify which sizes occurred where. Also referencing the specification, because of course I always have Bluebeam open at the same time with the spec book, searchable. The spec also showed a couple of types of curtain wall systems, type 1 and type 2 systems, which are 4-sided capture versus 2-sided capture respectively, although the DD drawings didn't identify those either. So the challenge here was, how can we use Assemble to determine the framing sizes and system types? Well, using the section tool in Assemble, we can cut through the exterior wall to get a nice cross-section of the glazing here at this northwest elevation, and then use the dimensioning tool to zoom in and get framing sizes. So in this case, you can see the framing size there was identified as 7-inch, and I knew exactly what to figure there. And then to determine where those type 1 and type 2 systems occurred, you can look at the modeled mullions at each area just to see if they're one-sided or two-sided or four-sided rather. I mean, everybody loves mullions in Revit, so this is one example of where we could actually use it to our benefit, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually think that this comes up so often that mullions are kind of an afterthought in the system a lot of times when, especially in the situation of DD, you're really not dealing with the thought process of what mullions are putting in that early. And so being able to, like you said, take from the spec book and then use Assemble to condition those and actually put them in a category, put them in a spot or a line item in your estimate that early, it certainly means that as you evolve through the process, you're able to take your assumptions and build upon them and actually validate them as you move forward in the design.
Yeah, certainly. So that was, just a way that we could really quickly help ourselves identify kind of what goes where and what are they really calling for at these locations without having the information being tagged in the DD drawings.
Yeah.
Gaining that information at DD level is valuable to the glazing subcontractors and bidders, providing them with Assemble views or even the groupings, as I mentioned before, can really help make sure that they're also assigning the right unit costs to the right systems. I also think, in this case, we can share the views and groupings with the design team themselves and the owner just to clarify any assumptions that we might have made in pricing at this level to make sure they understand what we figured, and then also to begin the discussion about which systems really belong where, and then maybe identifying them for the next design issue.
Yeah, and in the previous example, you had some of the kind of custom color coding based on the type or category. And I think previously when we spoke about this, you mentioned that with those subcontractor views or views for the design team, that you guys were using the conditioning you had and then applying the coloring to that. So it was a very quick and easy review. Is that right?
That is correct. The color by property is another feature that it's not terribly new in Assemble, but it's something that has come along probably within the last 12 or 18 months, and I think it's really helpful in communicating visually where certain things are. When you first load a model into Assemble and you're kind of overwhelmed with 3D geometry, if you have all the models turned on, by filtering down and isolating certain things and then coloring different components, that's really, really effective in communicating kind of what are we looking at, where do certain things live, and it's really, really effective in that way.
Yeah, and I can imagine that sharing that back, like you said, back to the design team or potentially the owner to say, these are our assumptions. Right. You're in good shape because there are likely already assumptions going on in their mind, even if that detail hasn't been put on plans. And they're going to quickly be able to understand and look at what you're doing versus what they have in their head, and that color coding makes all of that pop out so quickly and much easier to validate against those assumptions. So I think that's a fantastic workflow there.
Yeah, and again, it's really important at this stage, using design development as sort of the example stage that we were at in pricing, because if we make an assumption that's not correct, or if the intent on the design side was different than what we assumed, there could be a drastic difference in cost. So being able to articulate both to our bidders what we want them to price, and also back to the owner and the design team as to what we have priced, that's really important.
Absolutely.
So the next example that I wanted to go through here in pre-construction was plumbing. In this hospital building, we have four different roof levels and 7 levels of plumbing fixtures. So at the top level, level 7, there are, I think, 15 15 plumbing stacks, which all flow down and eventually combine into 3 main stacks at ground level. So at DD level design documentation, we weren't provided a full riser diagram. We sort of got a partial diagram that was noted as typical, but it wasn't typical. And so while they do show on the riser where the stacks are on that 2D sheet, the plumbing contractors would essentially have to figure out all the flows from the roof drains and the fixtures. So instead of taking the time to, scratch and sniff through the documentation to figure out how all those risers are connected and flow down through the building, we essentially use Assemble to filter and isolate to only show the sanitary piping system, shown here in pink, as a sort of a tree, or at least, the main trunk parts of the tree that we really needed in this phase of budgeting. In this visual example, I also use the ghost or X-ray mode to give some reference and perspective to those levels I mentioned. But it's very easy to isolate the sanitary tree and to identify how the risers are connected together. Using this then, it's far easier for us or for the bidders to figure out the horizontal connections and the distances based on the fixture placements. Again, this would be a point of discussion for the design team. Maybe this becomes an RFI to verify, or we just simply request a full riser diagram at the next design issue. But I think the real benefit here is for the mechanical bidders not having to figure it out and go through and hunt and peck through to figure out what the distances are for those flows.
Yeah, absolutely. And just on that last bullet point, you have it's very easy to isolate the sanitary tree. And what I noticed as you're talking through that is you guys have saved out views that you're leveraging. Can you talk a little bit about how,
yes,
in some cases, you might think it's easy to dig into something, but you have an inexperienced user or you want to get them in. The idea there is you're actually creating views for anyone to access that same data.
Right, and that's a great point, Tim. I didn't want to get too into the nitty-gritty of estimating practice, but essentially I'll approach estimating a project working from general to more specific. So when it comes time to work on systems, I might do HVAC, mechanical equipment, ductwork, piping first, and then move on to plumbing. So in this case, if I'm working on plumbing, I'll say, okay, what's going on with sanitary? How is this system connected and where is it going? Looking again just at the DD documentation given in 2D sheets, it was a little difficult to determine that. So I decided to create a view in Assemble. I'll basically turn on the MEP systems design model and then do, under visibility settings, do a real quick show only. And I use the system type in this case, and the system type is sanitary. So show only that. I will color it very brightly, either green, pink, orange, something like that, so it's easy to see. And then I'll ghost out the rest of the model so that I have that sort of reference point as to where these lines are occurring, which levels and so forth.
Perfect. And to come right back up out of the weeds, I just wanted you to kind of dive in that you guys are leveraging a number of different properties, and your users might be on a spectrum. You might have obviously the expert users or more experienced down to people that are really getting into BIM for the first time. And I wanted to point out or kind of have you talk through the process that there is some that you might, as an expert user, take into account and then leverage that capability to share across the team. And I think today you're really kind of talking about how that information is shared across stakeholders in a project. And here in a second, we're going to dive into project managers who, on a kind of a broad spectrum, aren't really in deep with this sort of information. So having that kind of surface level, I can jump in just to look at the data that I want and not the whole model, I think is critical. And so with that said, kind of shifting to the next slide for you, why don't, you move from DD on into CD and win the bid, or you guys have moved past GMP. Why don't you elaborate on some of the process you guys use for introducing your project management team into this content?
So one of the things that you just mentioned that I think is really important is the assemble views. So I described kind of how I arrived at that sanitary tree, how I was able to isolate using a certain property, system type, and so forth. But no matter what trade you're working on or what objects in the model you're trying to isolate, sort of the most digestible piece of information from assemble is going to be an assemble view. So saving out those views, that's really how we're sharing this information with the stakeholders, whether it be bidders. You can share, certain views, as in the glazing example, with the design team, or in this example coming up with project management based on an exterior skin study. But assemble views for any user out there who's maybe just getting started with assemble, getting familiar with and learning how to produce views that are effective and only passing along the information that's pertinent to whatever you're working on, I think that's really the key to being good at assemble, so to speak. So for project management, this hospital building has several different types of finish systems on the exterior skin. We have Apollic and Trespa panels, we have terracotta panels, and brick veneer. It's really important for project management to have accurate quantities in order to schedule installation of these exterior systems. And here we're focusing only on the brick veneer. Previously we've shown how it's really easy to get sort of total quantities of system types or materials, but here what project management really needs are those quantities at each elevation of the building, since that's how they're actually installed. I also just wanted to have a quick thank you to Brent Ramos on the Assemble team, who helped answer our questions on this point. This was something that came up kind of early in working through Assemble processes, but he was able to show our team different ways to output our exterior skin quantities by elevation. But the groupings that we're creating here by elevation, rather than just the total quantity of brick veneer, those groupings can really help procurement by grouping what's needed in sequence, so the order in which you're going to move around the building to install. And then those groupings can also be used by the field supers to track shipments, deliveries, unloading, sorting, and managing the crews for installation of this skin. So this is an example where the accurate quantities in the way that you need them, not just the total quantity, is really important, and Assemble certainly helped us there.
Yeah, this is a great example of conditioning, and specifically for PMs and a variety of use cases there. You talked a little bit through the fact that this conditioning allows you to look at it a lot of different ways. So if your project manager is dealing with negotiations and buyout, they can do kind of analysis with one view around your scope gap or scope overlap, and looking at that facade in a certain way that's color-coded by one set of conditioning that you've done or one set of coding, and then really quickly jump out and jump back into a different view for better understanding, the quantities just for the mason. And in this case, you're looking at that, just quantities for the mason and the roll-up by facade. And obviously then that, as project management continues, carries down into your shipments, your scheduling, the work breakdown structure that you're doing for the project. So fantastic example here.
So the MEP team, which I mentioned earlier, they are amazing. First off, Vince and his guys are great, and they were pretty much the first group here to start using BIM tools and processes on a consistent basis. Through 3D coordination, that's sort of the low-hanging fruit of value add for BIM processes. But right away, I sort of saw value add to his team through a feature in Assemble that I'm not sure a lot of people use a whole lot, but it's export to Navisworks search sets. And since we're doing a lot of the upfront work, as I alluded to earlier, we try to double up on work or time spent wherever possible. But if we're doing a lot of upfront work in estimating for identifying and breaking down different system types, supply, exhaust, return ductwork, mechanical piping, sanitary piping, as in the other example, we should really be kind of passing that along to the MEP team so that when they go to begin coordination, those search sets in Navisworks are already built out. So essentially by filtering and isolating the different systems and then saving them out as Navisworks search sets, we're saving the MEP team probably a couple hours in going through and creating those sets themselves. So right there, obvious value add, right? But aside from the actual coordination process and the back and forth between sub-sketchers and our team with sign-offs, etc., with the introduction of Assemble into their lives, the main goal quickly became getting the fully coordinated model files published to Assemble for them to essentially be viewing the intended as-built condition. Now, as far as publishing the fully coordinated model files, there are various ways to accomplish this. I'm not going to get into details on what works in what cases and so forth, but I think the main thing is if that's something that might prove valuable for a team that's out there in the audience, if this is a desired result, you want to really think through it and try to include that type of desired outcome or output within your BIM execution plan. So declare the file types that are easiest for you guys to sort of receive and publish to Assemble, and what information you want to go along with that. Once the coordinated files are published, obviously just like with the other trades, we can really easily isolate the systems and track progress of installation. In this visual, we have a couple of different kind of areas of work going on. We have rooftop unit replacements. We have a boiler plant with piping wrapping all the way around the building. We also have a rooftop unit that's passing all the way down through to a radiology department on the first floor of this building. So Assemble makes it really easy to, again, break down sort of areas of work, whether it's by zone, by floor, by trade, or by system. So this is really valuable to them because it's a great visual communication tool for the PMs when working out issues with the subcontractors on site rather than paging through 2D sheets and highlighting the systems. I think this visual goes a long way to say, okay, here's everything associated with this area of work that we're tackling for the next 2 or 3 weeks.
Perfect, Matt, and I appreciate that. And I did do a quick alteration to your slides for those that are interested in that workflow to export out Navisworks search sets. As Matt mentioned, you can do all of the grouping and organization within the grid that you want to do. And then let's see if this will work if I transition to the next slide. What you have the ability to do right within the grid is open up export import options. And then from there, you'll get a dialog that allows you to export to Navisworks search sets. Within the Navisworks side, you would just import those search sets and you have all of the same grouping structure that you would expect to see from Assemble. I just wanted to add that in and clarify that that's the workflow you go through for that. Matt, why don't you dive back in and kind of shift from project management, coordination on into the field.
Great, thanks, Tim. For field supers, one of the questions we had to ask was, what issues are they dealing with on site, and how could the 3D views help them? Any of the views created in the above examples obviously could be valuable for field supers, if not just to provide already isolated bits of scope for their reference when they're working on those items in the field. But we also heard directly from several of our supers that they'd like access to the models and certain 3D views in the field. So we used some of those already created Assemble views and provided them access either directly through the Assemble web app, the integration with Procore, or via the Assemble mobile app. They said it's pretty useful for them to have a tool that allows them to marry up 3D views with the 2D sheets as well. It helps them communicate and coordinate much better with the sub-teams on their sites. We also wanted to allow field teams to not only act as consumers of the model views and data, but also produce some of their own data, tracking progress on different scope items, inputting the data back into Assemble via the mobile app. Being able to visually see that progress for them or to communicate it back to the owner or even to our side, I think is extremely valuable for all the parties.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think part of our introduction of our mobile platform was around both, the idea there is consumption and contribution of field data. And there's the twofold in my mind as you talk about this. One is that a superintendent on the job site is going to have to make decisions whether they have the data at their fingertips or not. And it's just keeping your job moving forward. That's part of it, and it's it's problem solving on the fly a lot of times, and having the ability to provide them. In this case, breakdown of openings within Zone 1 and having that color-coded based on level by level makes it so easy to dive into that and have that review while you're standing there on the job site with your foreman or, generally your superintendents and subcontractors. And then two, there's so much valuable feedback that you may get into it in a second here, but that you're able to provide the owner and the rest of the team as they contribute things like status updates on items when items are complete, and that goes on and on.
Yeah, there's really a whole host of possibilities that open up when you arm your field team with a tool like this. And one of the terms that you just used I thought was really interesting. You said problem solving. I think at the very core, at least our guys in the field, because they're some of the best, they think of themselves as problem solvers. So when we enable them with tools and technology like this, I think that you'd be surprised how valuable it can be and what they can come up with as far as new ways to solve problems, and also the information that they're bringing back for our team to continue learning and solving additional problems on future projects.
Yeah, absolutely. And from my experience in that case, I saw so many more use cases coming out of the fact that, oh, okay, now I know this information is available. What can you do this, and this for me? There are so many things that they're going to be reviewing and looking at in a different perspective than the typical VDC team or the guys that might be in pre-construction looking at a different vantage point. So always great to include that side.
It really opens it up for sure, yep. So, and finally, I wanted to think a little bit about how is this going to benefit our clients, I mean, ultimately our customers. What value can we bring to them? So we found, number one, that communicating visually is far more effective when discussing projects with anyone who may not be used to dissecting and discussing a set of 2D plans in order to understand scope of work. So the old adage that a picture's worth 1,000 words is really true in this case, but I think a 2D picture isn't quite as valuable as a 3D color-coded picture, right? So visual communication is primary as far as value add there. It's just far easier to have these conversations when you have a visual tool and a way to isolate or identify certain areas for discussion. It's certainly easier for our PM teams to show visually what might have changed along the way when reviewing cost events or change orders to help the owners arrive at decisions faster in their review. So that's certainly a value add. It's easier just to have what-if discussions. Our approach to the project and marrying that with the owner's needs and expectations. It's also easier to explore design options and scenarios and how those might affect cost, schedule, or just the overall project outcome. So we think that, views and groupings and some of the other bits of information that we talked about throughout this presentation can certainly be valuable for owners in the same way that it's valuable for the other team members.
Absolutely. And I think your kind of old saying of a picture's worth 1,000 words, in this sense, I love to say a picture's worth 1,000 words, but a model's worth 1,000 pictures.
Right.
In the situation that you have your traditional 2D documents and you're doing a plan flip with your owner, I always like to think about the fact that as general contractors, we're professionals at looking at the project documents and understanding what's going on. Most people that have experience in doing that get the ability or have the ability or think the way of being able to build out the project from those documents. I can look at a set of plans and understand how a lot of that comes together. Having the model, though, in front of you, one, it does, for everyone, does that a lot faster. But two, for owners, a lot of times these people aren't construction professionals. Most of the time they're not. They're either educators or business operators, or they fly airplanes or whatever it might be. And a vast majority of the situations, they're not accustomed to reading plans. And so both on the design side and use of design, or BIM and design, and then on the construction side, any of those 3D aspects that you can put that model in front of someone and show them what's going on or what's going to happen for their project or their budget or overall look and feel of things it's so valuable. And so I always like to push, like, get this sort of information in front of your owners. Use this during those conversations. Leverage the data that's there to group, sort, filter, et cetera, and provide the best look at the project overall.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better. So this was by no means an exhaustive list of kind of the ways to use information. I was mostly just trying to come up with some examples and ideas for everyone out there to get everyone thinking about how the BIM data, both upstream and downstream, and how you might use Assemble to share some of this valuable info with everyone on the team to just improve your projects.
Well, fantastic. I really appreciate it, and I do think this is a very wide spectrum of use cases, and great to hear from you, Matt. And with that said, we're going to be kind of transitioning over to Q&A, but before we do, I really want to thank you for joining us and taking the time to go through those different workflows. I know it takes a lot of time to get some of this data set up and organized to contribute to a webinar like this, and we really appreciate it, and I hope everyone on the line does as well.
Appreciate you having me. Thank you, Don. And I just wanted to note that a lot of the examples I used were from real projects, so it wasn't that I specifically kind of worked these up for the purposes of the
Sure.
webinar. This is a real project we're working on, and we're really excited about it to be using the latest and greatest tools to help ourselves out.
Dan, I'd just take a minute to add my thanks to you, Matt. And I would say that you have a very advanced use of the product, which shows that you and your team are taking this opportunity to improve your construction project management very seriously. And, this is available to everybody, but you've got to get in there and make it happen. And it's clear that you're doing that.
Thank you so much, Don. I appreciate it.